Have you ever wondered why life expectancy was so low back then? We're used to blaming plague epidemics, endless bloody wars, and the complete lack of antibiotics, but we stubbornly forget about the hidden statistics of deaths that occurred every night in utter silence. A normal night's sleep killed people by the thousands, and this wasn't recorded in the chronicles. Modern science is only now beginning to fully appreciate the true scale of this catastrophe. Toxicologists, infectious disease specialists, and engineers all agree that the peasant home was a fatal architectural mistake. It was literally an incubator for infectious diseases and a perfect trap for sudden fire. And yet millions of people had absolutely no other choice. Get ready to forget everything you thought you knew about peaceful, cozy rural life. The harsh reality will hit you right in the face with the acrid smell of smoke, rot, and danger. The fact is, in most peasant homes until the late Middle Ages, there simply were no chimneys. The hearth was built right in the center of the living room on a packed earthen floor. Your modern chimney effectively vents carbon monoxide outside, saving your life every second. Back then, that entire toxic cocktail remained inside the cramped room. It was assumed that the acrid smoke would slowly seep through the cracks in the thatched roof. But the physics of gases worked differently, and the smoke quickly accumulated in a thick layer right under the wooden ceiling. And it was precisely there, in the attic or on a flimsy, suspended floor, that the peasants' main sleeping area was located. People literally went to sleep right in a thick cloud of deadly toxic smog. Carbon monoxide has neither color nor odor, making it the perfect silent killer. Carbon monoxide poisoning while sleeping was an incredibly common and completely unnoticeable cause of death. A person would simply fall asleep, exhausted after hard work in the fields, and never wake up again. Neighbors believed they had died of old age or evil spirits, completely unaware of the true cause. Modern smoke detectors would start blaring in such a house within 3 seconds. But for a medieval peasant, the only safety measures were his own coughing and watery eyes. The body was constantly in a state of severe oxygen deprivation. This wore down the heart and brain much faster than any hard physical labor. Interestingly, people understood perfectly well the connection between smoke and feeling unwell. But the choice was between slow poisoning upstairs and immediate death from frostbite downstairs. The cold earthen floor in winter killed much faster and more painfully than the invisible gas under the roof. So the peasants gritted their teeth, climbed into the attic, and hoped to wake up the next morning. In essence, every peasant home functioned as a giant and highly efficient smokehouse. Only instead of pork legs, living people were smoked there along with their children. Modern emergency doctors describe such conditions as incompatible even with a brief stay. Yet our ancestors spent 8 hours every night in this gas chamber. Even if carbon monoxide didn't kill a person instantly, it caused irreparable damage to the body. Chronic headaches, constant nausea, and dizziness were the constant companions of the residents of such homes. Today we rush to the pharmacy at the slightest sign of illness. They, however, considered such a condition the absolute norm of life. It wasn't until centuries later, when proper stone chimneys began to be built en masse in homes, that the situation changed. The rate of sudden nighttime deaths dropped sharply. But by that point, millions of people had fallen victim to their own need for warmth. It was a cruel irony of survival in a harsh climate. The next time you complain about the stuffy air in the office, remember this story. At least your office isn't trying to suffocate you with invisible gas while you're typing up a report. Peasants sacrificed their health simply for the right not to freeze to death in their sleep. And that was just the first of many deadly threats in the attic. If invisible gas didn't kill you, there was always a bright and very hot alternative. Thatched roofs were incredibly dry on top and would ignite from the slightest accidental spark. And right under that roof, people slept, locked in a cramped space. You were literally sleeping inside a giant bonfire, just waiting to ignite. The hearth was located right in the center of the house, and the fire in it was kept burning practically around the clock. One careless gust of wind through the cracks in the doors, and the red-hot embers would shoot upward. If a spark rose too high and touched the dry straw, the roof would burst into flames almost instantly. It was like a powder keg exploding. A person sleeping in the attic found themselves right in the fiery epicenter of this local apocalypse. They had no precious seconds to realize what was happening and get downstairs. Often, the heavy burning roof would crash down on him with a thunderous roar before he had a chance to fully wake up. It was a horrific death from which there was no protection. Modern houses are built from fire-resistant materials, and we have fire extinguishers everywhere. In the Middle Ages, your only firefighting system was an old wooden bucket of stale water. And while you were frantically searching for that bucket in the dark, the house would burn to the ground. Straw burns so quickly that there's simply no chance of putting it out from the inside. It sounds crazy, but the peasants knew about this risk and built their houses this way anyway. Why? Because straw was the only affordable and free material available for insulating the roof. Stone tiles cost a fortune, more than an ordinary farmer could earn in a lifetime. They literally had to live on a powder keg and pray that a spark wouldn't fly upward. Sometimes fires didn't even start from the hearth inside, but from a lightning strike outside. In such cases, the fire spread across the roof at such a terrifying speed that those sleeping inside were burned alive. The attic turned into a fiery furnace in a matter of minutes. The temperature there reached levels high enough to melt copper. To at least somewhat reduce the risk, the coals on the hearth were carefully covered with ash at night. But rats or pets could accidentally disturb this ash while searching for food scraps. A single exposed smoldering ember was enough to start a chain reaction, and then a cozy sleep turned into a veritable nightmare. Interestingly, in some European cities, laws later strictly banned thatched roofs precisely because of fires. But this applied only to densely built-up cities, where fire destroyed entire neighborhoods. In villages, however, this deadly architectural style persisted for centuries. A peasant's life was worth too little for the authorities to worry about his safety. If you slept on the ground floor, you had at least a small chance of running out the door. Those sleeping upstairs were utterly doomed as the fire cut off their path to the stairs. They found themselves trapped between the blazing roof above and the burning floorboards below, a veritable fiery hell that people built for themselves. That is why modern fire safety regulations are literally written in the blood and ashes of our ancestors. What seems like tedious bureaucracy to us today would have saved millions of lives in the Middle Ages. Sleeping on dry straw with an open fire below is the worst lottery in history, and unfortunately, many drew a losing ticket in it. If you think that fire and smoke were your only neighbors, you are sorely mistaken. The warm straw and constant proximity to the heat from the hearth made the roof an ideal biological incubator. Thousands of fleas, lice, infectious mites, and huge spiders happily settled there, and they all adored the warm human body. During the day, while people worked in the fields, this microscopic zoo sat quietly in the straw and multiplied. But at night, when the temperature dropped and the parasites began to move actively in search of food, a real nightmare began. They literally rained down from the dilapidated ceiling onto the people sleeping below. It was a nasty, rustling, living rain. You lie in pitch darkness, trying to fall asleep after a hard day's work, and suddenly you feel something crawling all over your face, and then something bites your neck. It's impossible to brush them off, because the insects are falling from above by the hundreds. Overnight, your mattress has turned into a veritable feeding ground for all kinds of parasites. Incidentally, it was precisely to protect against this disgusting rain from the ceiling that the nobility later invented four-poster beds. The beautiful fabric above the king's bed wasn't just for looks. It served as a simple trap for bedbugs. But poor peasants couldn't afford expensive silk or heavy linen. They had to put up with it and let the bugs eat them alive. Modern people panic at the sight of a single bedbug in a luxury hotel. A medieval peasant would simply scratch himself and roll over to the other side. Parasite bites were as commonplace as the sunrise or taxes to the feudal lord. But this ordinariness carried a hidden and very terrifying biological threat. Every flea or tick bite was a microscopic injection of unknown bacteria directly into the bloodstream. The peasants' immune systems were constantly working at their limit, fending off these attacks. It's comparable to modern cross-training. Only instead of lifting weights, your body was fighting infections around the clock. Children suffered the most from this biological barrage, as their skin was thinner and more sensitive. Constant itching kept them awake, leading to chronic nervous exhaustion. When scratched with dirty hands, the bites would instantly become inflamed and turn into festering sores. Without antibiotics, even such a minor issue could easily lead to blood poisoning. Some peasants tried to combat this by hanging bundles of strongly scented herbs under the roof. They hoped that the smell of wormwood or lavender would scare away the hungry insects, but the effect was minimal, and the parasites quickly grew accustomed to the new scents. After all, human blood was too tempting a lure. It sounds disgusting, but that was the harsh reality of medieval life. Your home didn't belong solely to you. You shared it with millions of invisible tenants, and these tenants didn't pay rent. They fed exclusively on you, an ideal survival strategy for them and a living nightmare for you. The next time you think there's a mosquito in your bedroom, think of the peasants. A single mosquito is a minor nuisance compared to a cascade of hungry bedbugs. Survival in those days required not only physical strength, but also incredible psychological resilience and nerves of steel to sleep peacefully under such a ceiling. If insects were an annoying nuisance, the following neighbors posed a real physical threat. Thatched roofs were often made from unthreshed grain, which contained plenty of tasty ears of corn, and this free feast attracted whole hordes of hungry mice and huge rats. The attic turned into a noisy metropolis, teeming with rodents. These animals didn't just come for a snack. They wove huge, warm nests deep within the roof. The people sleeping upstairs were in close proximity to this aggressive rat colony. At night, the rodents felt like the undisputed masters of the situation and ran freely over the sleeping bodies. And they were far from the most polite roommates. The rats often bit people in their sleep, especially on exposed parts of the body, the face, ears, and fingers. A hungry rodent can't tell the difference between a piece of old bacon and your nose in the dark. People regularly woke up from a sharp pain and found bleeding wounds on themselves. And a rat bite is a guaranteed and very dangerous infection. But the bites were only half of this vile problem. Rat droppings and urine constantly rained down on the sleeping people from above, seeping through the straw. This toxic rain contaminated the meager food, open wounds, and the people themselves with extremely dangerous bacteria. This went on for decades, long before the famous Black Death epidemics began. In essence, the peasants slept in a giant open rodent trough. Modern health inspectors would have shut down such a facility after a single second of inspection. But in those days, the concept of germs and sanitation simply did not exist in people's minds. They viewed illness as a punishment from above, not the result of rat droppings in their hair. Many tried to keep cats to at least somewhat control the rodent population. But a village cat was physically unable to handle the hundreds of rats living in the thick thatch of the huge roof. Rats often banded together in packs and attacked small domestic predators themselves. That's why cats preferred to sleep downstairs, far away from the dangerous attic. Worst of all, the rats carried the very fleas we mentioned earlier. This created a deadly symbiosis. The rats brought infected fleas right to the human's bed. A flea would bite an infected rat, then fall down and bite a sleeping peasant. It was a perfect and foolproof mechanism for delivering deadly viruses. It was especially terrifying to hear the constant squeaking and scratching of claws right above your ear all night long. The psychological pressure from such neighbors drove people mad, just as much as the physical ailments. You lie in the dark, knowing full well that hundreds of disease carriers are swarming around you, and you can't hide from them anywhere. For a modern person, a single mouse scurrying by is reason enough to call the exterminators. For a medieval person, it was simply the background noise against which they tried to rest. They shared their meager shelter with the worst pests in human history, and they often paid for this coexistence with their own lives. Sleeping in the attic was a true test of your immune system's resilience. If the smoke didn't kill you and the fire didn't consume you, you were slowly poisoned by rat waste. It was brutal natural selection right within the confines of your own home. Only those whose bodies could digest this biological chaos survived. Straw alone was often woefully insufficient to keep a house warm. Roofs and wooden floors needed to be insulated and sealed against the biting wind. To do this, peasants used a free and readily available mixture of clay, mud, and cow or horse manure. It was an ancient version of modern construction foam, only with a horrendous smell. The fresh mixture did an excellent job of sealing the cracks and keeping out the cold air from the street. But here, the very central hearth that burned right beneath this floor came into play. From the constant, intense heat, this manure mixture quickly dried out, shrank, and cracked. And that's when a completely imperceptible but deadly chemical attack on the lungs began. Modern builders use respirators even when working with ordinary harmless spackling compound. Peasants, however, voluntarily breathed in fecal dust for several hours at a time, day in and day out. This dust settled deep in the alveoli of the lungs, causing severe and chronic inflammation. Doctors of the time could not understand why young farmers so often coughed up blood. Such breathing led to the development of severe respiratory infections, similar to modern silicosis. Only instead of noble stone dust, the lungs were cemented with dried manure and dirt. The immune system desperately tried to fight off the foreign particles, causing a constant high fever and weakness. A person slowly wasted away, barely realizing that their own ceiling was killing them. You couldn't simply air out the room because it was freezing outside. You had to choose, suffocate from manure dust or turn into an ice statue. Naturally, people chose warmth, condemning their lungs to slow and agonizing destruction. It was a compromise in which it was physically impossible to win. Infants and young children suffered particularly badly from this airborne dust. Their tiny lungs simply couldn't cope with such a frenzied, toxic load every night. This was one of the main causes of the horrifying infant mortality rate in those harsh, dark centuries. They were born into a world where even the simple air inside the house was deadly poisonous. Ironically, manure was used as a symbol of fertility and life in the endless fields. But when it was brought into the house and hung overhead, it turned into a silent executioner. People literally walled themselves into a sarcophagus made of animal waste. And this sarcophagus slowly but surely did its destructive work. It was only with the advent of new construction technologies and lime mortar that this practice began to fade. But until then, several generations of people breathed in this deadly mixture. Modern pulmonologists would be absolutely horrified if they examined an X-ray of a peasant from those days. Their lungs were black long before the advent of industrial factories and smog. So, when you sneeze from the dust on your bookshelf, just smile. Your dust is just harmless particles of skin and cotton, not dried horse manure. Our ancestors would have given anything for the chance to breathe the air in your dirty, modern apartment. To them, it would have been crystal clear mountain air. If you hadn't suffocated or had a rotten beam collapse on you, the next challenge awaited you. We're used to thermostats that maintain a perfect 22 degrees Celsius around the clock. In a medieval peasant home, the concept of climate control was as fantastical as a trip to the moon. Insulation in such homes was minimal, and the cracks in the walls were massive. In winter, while the fire roared in the hearth, hot air rushed straight up into the attic. An unbearable, suffocating heat reigned on the sleeping platform, comparable to a good Finnish sauna. Sleeping people sweated profusely, throwing off their coarse woolen blankets in search of coolness. Their clothes and the straw beneath them were instantly soaked with sticky sweat. But firewood was expensive, and the fire couldn't burn at full strength all night long. As soon as the coals began to cool, the magic of the heat dissipated in a matter of cruel minutes. A piercing, icy wind began to blow through the huge cracks in the straw and walls into the attic. And there you were, drenched in sweat, suddenly finding yourself in the middle of a freezer. This extreme temperature swing, from a sauna to a glacier in a single hour, was deadly. Skin damp with sweat would freeze instantly, causing a violent spasm of the blood vessels. Modern sauna enthusiasts dive into an ice hole for a couple of seconds for the adrenaline rush and health benefits. Peasants, however, lay in this hole for hours, their teeth chattering desperately from the bitter cold. Their bodies, already severely weakened by a meager and monotonous diet, often could not withstand such temperature fluctuations. The immune system failed, and the person instantly suffered severe hypothermia. This almost always resulted in severe, fatal pneumonia or deep bronchitis. And in the Middle Ages, pneumonia was a guaranteed one-way ticket to the local cemetery. Doctors of that time tried to treat colds with leeches and prayers, which, to put it mildly, didn't work. A person would burn up with fever in a matter of days simply because their sleeping quarters didn't retain heat. This was not the heroic death in battle with a sword in hand that songs were written about. It was a quiet death from a simple draft in one's own filthy attic. To keep warm at all after the hearth had cooled, people slept huddled together, pressing tightly against one another. Sometimes they brought small domestic animals like dogs or pigs up onto the floorboards with them. The body heat of a neighbor was the only salvation from certain frostbite under a leaky roof. Personal space? In those days, that concept was synonymous with certain death from the cold. Even today, doctors strictly forbid going out in the frosty winter wind while wet. But the peasants had no choice. The frost came to them in bed every night. They fell asleep in the tropics and woke up at the North Pole without ever getting up from their straw mattresses. And this cycle repeated itself every winter night throughout their short lives. So when you complain that the office AC is blowing right on you, just remember this fact. Your discomfort is a mere tickle compared to the medieval nighttime cryotherapy. Their thermoregulation operated at such extreme levels that modern athletes would be envious. Only the prize in this sport was simply the right to survive another grueling day. Sleeping in the attic was a constant test of your cardiovascular system's endurance. Your heart had to pump blood through both scorching heat and bitter cold. It's no surprise that many hearts simply stopped, never making it to the saving spring sun. If you love the taste of smoked bacon or fish, you probably enjoy the process. But you'd hardly want to find yourself in the place of that piece of meat in the smokehouse. Peasants traditionally hung fresh hams, caught fish, and various herbs from the attic beams. This was done for hot smoking and to protect valuable supplies from hungry ground rodents. The problem was that people were forced to sleep in exactly the same cramped space. They shared the space with pigs' legs and bunches of garlic hanging overhead. All that thick smoke from the hearth, which preserved the meat, had the same effect on the sleeping people. The peasants were subjected to the same harsh and continuous smoking as their winter supplies. Over months of such nights, their skin and hair became thoroughly saturated with the acrid smell of smoke and lard. A person literally smelled like a walking piece of good bacon, which hardly helped in their personal life. But the repulsive smell was the least of the problems this process brought with it. Far more terrifying was what was happening inside the human body as a result of such exposure. Constant inhalation of carcinogenic smoke containing particles of burnt fat caused irreversible consequences. The mucous membrane of the respiratory tract became covered with a thick, dark crust, similar to soot in a chimney. This led to the development of severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in very young people. Doctors would later call this horrific syndrome peat bog lung, or peasant's lung. Modern smokers can only shudder at the dose of tar a medieval farmer was exposed to. Smoking a pack of cigarettes is child's play compared to a night in such an attic. Their lungs lost their elasticity, and every breath was accompanied by a heavy, wheezing rasp. They gasped for air at the slightest physical exertion, even though working in the fields demanded tremendous stamina. Now add to that the fact that the smoking meat dripped fat straight down. Scorching drops of pork fat could easily fall on a sleeping person, causing excruciating burns. It sounds like a scene from a dark comedy, but it was harsh everyday reality. You're sleeping, and your own future breakfast is pouring boiling oil on you from above. This smoked effect made peasants look much older than their actual age. The constant smoke tanned their skin, making it tough and covered in deep, dark wrinkles. A 20-year-old man, after a few years of sleeping under that roof, could look like a very old man. Smoking preserves dead meat perfectly, but it destroys living tissue at a catastrophic rate. Interestingly, this process was considered completely normal and even a sign of good housekeeping. If there was a lot of meat hanging in the attic and thick smoke filling the air, it meant the family was certainly not going hungry. People took pride in their smokehouses, unaware that they were paying for this abundance with their own health. They traded years of their lives for a few months of a well-fed winter. Today we buy smoked meats in clean vacuum-sealed packages in a bright supermarket. We don't stop to think about the hell people went through to create this preservation technology. They were both the creators of the smokehouse and its immediate living victims. And their lungs remembered every pork leg that hung next to their bed. So the next time you start coughing from the smoke of a campfire, calm down. You'll walk away from the fire in a couple of hours and return to a clean, fresh apartment. The peasant had nowhere to go. His campfire was his only home, and he smoked himself every night just to survive. Let's add one last, but no less fatal, touch to our nighttime nightmare. There was no electricity, and burning expensive candles just for light at night was an incredible waste. The house was enveloped in absolute, impenetrable, thick darkness in which you couldn't even see your own fingers. And in this darkness, people had to navigate a narrow wooden floor without any railings. Sleep in those distant times was often in two phases, which sounds very unusual today. People would wake up in the middle of the night for a couple of hours, chat, stoke the fire, and then go back to sleep. This meant they had to get up and walk around the attic in a state of deep drowsiness. In total darkness, on a rickety plank, it was all too easy to stumble while half asleep. And people stumbled with frightening regularity, stepping straight into the empty black abyss. Sometimes the cause of the fall was a sudden fright. A large rat ran across their foot, or a strange noise rang out. A person would instinctively jerk to the side, forgetting that they were several meters above the ground. And then came a short flight followed by a very hard and painful landing. Falling from a height of 3 meters onto a hard, rock-like, compacted earthen floor is serious business. But the worst part was that people often fell not just onto the floor, but right into the center of the room. And in the center of the room, as we recall, there was a smoldering or brightly burning hearth. Falling directly into the fire often resulted in severe burns incompatible with life. If you were lucky enough to fall past the fire, the result was open fractures of the legs, arms, or collarbones. There were no orthopedic surgeons in the village with X-ray machines and titanium plates for fixing bones. A complex fracture at that time meant either a painful amputation with a rusty saw or death from pain shock and infection. And all this simply because you wanted to use the bathroom in the middle of the night? Modern building codes require sturdy railings on any elevation higher than half a meter. Peasants didn't have enough wood for proper walls, let alone protective bed rails. They relied on muscle memory and the instinct for self-preservation, which work extremely poorly when you're half asleep. It was a life or death balancing act every single night. Even climbing the rickety ladder back up to the attic was a deadly quest. The steps were slippery with dirt and grease, and there was absolutely nothing to hold on to. One wrong move in the dark, and then you'd plummet backward onto stone millstones or iron cauldrons. Your own home was full of sharp and hard objects waiting for you to fall. We're used to turning on a nightlight or shining a smartphone when we go to the kitchen for a drink of water. We have smooth floors and soft carpets that forgive minor coordination errors. For a peasant, a single extra step beyond the sleeping area was a mistake. And that step became the last one he took in his hard and short life. That is precisely why sleeping in such conditions required maximum concentration, even in an unconscious state. The brain had to constantly monitor the body's boundaries to prevent it from slipping into the darkness. This explains why medieval people woke up so exhausted and worn out. Their brains simply had no opportunity to relax and shut down completely. So the next time you stub your little toe on the nightstand in the dark, don't curse. It's the best thing that could have happened to you during a nighttime stroll through your apartment. Your ancestors paid for such a mistake with a broken neck or singed hair. Darkness was their greatest enemy, hiding dangers in literally every inch of space. Summing up our grim historical investigation, one thing can be said with certainty. The life of an ordinary person in the Middle Ages was not just hard, it was desperately extreme. We are often struck by the courage of knights in shining armor who went out to fight to the death. But the peasants, sleeping in their rotten attics, showed no less bravery every night. They went to sleep in thick, toxic smoke, risking suffocation from carbon monoxide before dawn. They slept on straw as dry as gunpowder, a meter away from an open, blazing fire. They were bitten by infectious fleas and aggressive rats, which carried deadly bacteria and viruses straight into their bloodstream. They breathed in microscopic dust from dried feces, destroying their lungs with every breath. A rotten roof weighing many tons hung over their heads, ready to collapse at any unfortunate moment. They froze in the icy wind and suffocated from the unbearable heat, alternately smoking like pork. They had neither windows to escape through nor sturdy railings to keep them from falling into the darkness. And yet somehow they managed to survive, give birth to children, and carry on their incredibly difficult lineage. If you feel like you've had a bad or hard day at work, just remember this story. Think of the creaking floorboards, the icy draft, the smell of manure, and the rats scurrying right above your ear. Your modern-day problem will suddenly seem not so catastrophic against the backdrop of this harsh reality. History is the best cure for despondency and self-pity. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new historical investigations and discoveries. Like this video if you now love your modern pet a little more than before. Write in the comments which of the 10 facts scared or surprised you the most. Your engagement helps us create even more high-quality and in-depth content.